Hello, hello. I hope you hear me. I mean, people in the room hear me. I hope the people online hear me. My name is Mathias Dewatripont, and I will not introduce myself because I think people connected to I3h know uh, my role in this institution. Today, I want to present a seminar which I'm very happy about because it's a joint I3h piece with one addition, even though I think Alain is probably connected also to I3h in some role, but Alain Fichet is one of the co-authors and he's at the Collège de France. By the way, congratulations to the Collège de France because Philippe Aghion, professor of Collège de France, got the Nobel Prize in Economics today, so which is good. Now, indeed, as I say, so this is work on balancing innovation and affordability, and it's very much, as I say, an I3h piece because among the authors, I think we are 8 authors, including Alain Fichet. So Hilde Stevens here on site, Georges Siotis online, Michael Tertanira, myself, Sam Dams, Sana Akodat, and Michel and Alain. I think I have all the names. And we are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in the room. And we have Georges online. And I don't know whether Alain will join us online or not. But anyway, so as I said, even though I volunteered to present the paper, I always said that I'm sure there will be lots of things to fill, and I count on my many co-authors to help. Now, the issue, which is an issue that I3h is quite worked up about, is these recent developments, and by recent I mean probably more than 10 years, but 20 years. But the fact that at the same time we have progress of science with new promising opportunities like gene therapies and so on, but coming up at high prices. And every opportunity brings a challenge. And here the challenge is that the implications for public budgets, as we will see, become significant, while 95% of rare diseases are still without treatment. So we're already facing a potential problem of public finances, while there are a lot of unmet needs. And the European Commission has been working on these issues and pushing, as we will discuss, for fine-tuning the length of market exclusivity rights. And our view, I give you the punchline immediately, is that the EU approach, although helpful, is not going to be up to the existing challenges we are facing, and that we need a more multidimensional approach in order to address this innovation access trade-off. So we want to stimulate innovation, but we want, of course, the patients to be served at a price that is sustainable. Now, of course, it's public budgets that help, but the public budgets are under stress, especially in these days when you have also the green transition, the defense buildup, and all these kinds of things, and aging, of course, aging being super important. Now, the issue is about access, but it's also about innovation, and it's a big issue also for EU competitiveness. And the Draghi report, the famous Draghi report, is indeed stressing that pharma is a key market in size. It's the 4th largest in the world in terms of net sales. It's important in terms of GDP, 5% of EU value added to the economy from all manufacturing together. It's important about employment, almost 1 million people directly employed by the sector, and these are good jobs typically, and it's growing. And it's, of course, of geostrategic importance because, in time of pandemics, countries understandably look first for themselves. And so we need to be able to innovate. And, the COVID vaccine, I will very briefly come back to it, is a key example. Now, let's face it, the Draghi report has been saying, look, Europe is growing much slower than the US. There is a problem. Of course, a lot of the problem is big tech. It's about the GAFAMs or the Magnificent Seven or wherever. Well, let's face it, Europe is a bit pathetic. Here, Europe is much better. That's the good news. It's much better relative to the US, especially if in Europe you include the UK and Switzerland. But let's face it, even the EU per se has positive net exports, and that's one reason, by the way, why Trump wants to hit us in that sector too, because with tariffs is because he'd like the deficit, the trade deficit in that sector with Europe to be covered. So we have positive net export. You have a manufacturing base for medicines under patent. Of course, generics, a lot of it is in cheaper countries, but that's normal in a sense. And we are also good in terms of publication. However, as stressed by the Draghi report, the EU is falling behind in the most dynamic segments of the market, biologicals, which from 2012 to 2022 has increased in sales by 150%, while for total market growth in drugs is only 3 times, and legal drugs. And also in medicines based on genes, tissues, and cells, ATMPs, categories with often overlap, and orphan medicines. Orphan medicines, which has seen a huge increase. So total sales have been multiplied by 24 in 10 years. So that's huge. Huh? So and the EU is not doing as well in this sector as in the US. So we have both a budget affordability problem and an innovation problem. Now, to give you a very quick example, and let me, because here I will be talking about orphan diseases, and of course, COVID vaccine is not about orphan diseases, but it's still useful to think about lessons that we see. There are 2 lessons that are relevant that are mentioned in the paper. First of all, on innovation. So the first lesson is innovation, and the second is affordability. So on innovation, it's very clear, and we have discussed it in I3h. The US has been a very clear leader. They have very good research universities. So do we, but they are even better. The NIH is very important. BARDA, Biomedical Applied Research and Development Authority, has been great, even under the first Trump administration. Biotechs with very effective financial markets, good pharma companies, and they are more centralized. And so in times of crisis, centralization is always helpful, while we still have 27 countries and with a lot of checks and balances that can be helpful for democracy, but are not helpful for speed.
May I challenge you a bit with that? Because actually you mentioned BioNTech in the next slide, which is not based in the US. So it means that in terms of research and development, Europe still played an important role. And actually we could also mention AstraZeneca, who was also very, it's a vaccine, well, it's mentioned here with Oxford. So I think that we should acknowledge that Europe also has contributed.
I will have slides showing that a number of these strengths are indeed shared by Europe. but not all of them, and so we should complete it. Indeed, we have worked on this already in 2020 with Philippe Aguillon, who got the Nobel Prize today, and with Sofia Amaral Garcia. We had a little piece in Vox EU, arguing that BARDA, which is a federal agency with a lot of money, which we don't have. We now have HERA, but we're not with the same budget. But at the time, they were ready, and they chose very quickly 6 projects, half from the EU and half from the US, interestingly. And that was US taxpayer money and Trump. And so indeed, 3 technologies. The most successful mRNA was indeed Moderna in the US, biotech companies, and BioNTech, Germany. Pfizer came later, in fact. So you're fully right. We do have good universities. We do have good biotech companies. We do have some good big pharma companies. As you'll see, one of the projects funded again by US taxpayer money, Sanofi, GSK, so EU and UK. And, you know, as you said, the Oxford AstraZeneca was another. In the end, the technology that won was mRNA, but viral vector. I think AstraZeneca probably saves more people than any other of these companies. But the point is that what they have in the US, and that will be linked to our last recommendation, we will have 4 recommendations. The US has this big budget at federal level where they have an intelligent industrial policy. Intelligent means they were able to pick winners. And they diversified, and they took some big pharma, some biotechs, and so on. So that's point number 1. It would be good to, if Europe, to increase innovation speed. There are lessons in the US. There are lots of things that don't work in the US healthcare world. They spend a huge amount of money, and the statistics are not great. But on this innovation, they are helpful. The second thing, which is also helpful, is that the EU did innovate in purchasing. They did the joint procurement at EU level. Typically, you have each member state deciding with companies how much, which price they set. And here, since it was important, the EU said, look, we want fair access. Now, what these companies often do, and you know, they are profit maximizing companies, they look at who's ready to pay the most, and they get the product fastest. In that case, it was Israel, which, by the way, did allow the rest of the world to learn about the effect of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine on their population, because BioNTech had developed it and then Pfizer produced it. To make it simple, the UK and the US also had their connections. AstraZeneca is a UK company, even though it's also active in Sweden. Pfizer and Moderna for the US. The EU decided that no citizen left behind. We want access, and it's interesting that the Commission, Mrs. von der Leyen, managed to prevail, while in the beginning 4 countries had decided we'll go together and let's forget the rest. And these were Germany, France, Italy, and the Netherlands. Did imply some delay, but prices were low, and centralization did manage to have fair access. And so I think that's important, in particular, in terms of avoiding individual countries played one against the other, as well documented by Margaret Kyle, for example.
Could you go back one slide? Because what you said about Israel, I mean, the price was an element, but the other element was the health system, which actually allowed to gather very rapidly and efficiency data about efficiency and safety. So the two elements were important to convince.
Okay, well, thank you. I guess that's what I was trying to say when did allow the rest of the world to learn, but you're right that they had the system in place, and indeed, since we will be talking a bit about the health data space, there are probably lessons to learn from Israel on that point of view. Again, it's a central. It's one country, so it's centralized. So while the EU could centralize, that was an example of helpful centralization, but at the beginning, the EU was criticized for saying, this centralization means it takes time. It would be faster for German or French citizens to get it. But, as I often say, coming from Belgium, a little country where a lot of these vaccines were produced, I'm grateful to Ursula von der Leyen that we managed to get it at the same time as the French and Germans and Italians and Dutch.
Also innovating in terms of delivery of the vaccines. That was very decentralized.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so basically these are two lessons, and now back to the paper, back to orphan diseases. As you will see, on innovation, this will be linked to our fourth recommendation, and on the joint purchases, it will be linked to our first recommendation. So I've already said, look, the good news is that there is innovation on orphan diseases. So they are not orphan anymore. They are rare, but 5% of them are taken care of, and that's new, as you will see. But it comes with a big price. So the EU, in fact, they followed the US, which had earlier done the Orphan Drug Act, and the EU I think that was in the 80s, maybe 1980s. And then the EU followed in 2000 with its regulation on orphan medicinal products, OMPs. And basically what this does is to grant market exclusivity on top of patents. Now, patents are about chemical compounds, production methods, and the like, while market exclusivity gives you monopoly power on patient pools. Now, economists are typically against monopoly power, except to foster innovation, as Philippe Aguillon would say. And so patents are, you grant monopoly power on compounds and production methods. Market exclusivity grants also patents on patient pools. So you cannot, even if you find a new thing with the different methods, but on the same patients, well, you have to wait a bit, not forever, but and basically the idea being, well, we have a problem with rare diseases because it's not profitable enough, because there is a fixed cost, and therefore you need to protect in the future. This has worked. In the EU, we went from 8 OMPs available in 2000 to now more than 150. So it worked. And now there is even this new term next to blockbusters. So as you know, some big pharma companies, even though they are very big, they only make money on a couple of wonder drugs that are sold to millions of people. Here, we don't have millions of people, since these are rare diseases. In the EU, a rare disease is affecting less than 1 person out of 2,000. But now people talk about niche busters. So they are niche products, i.e. not for the masses, but they can still be very, very profitable. Why? Because they can carry very high prices, and it can go to millions for 1 person. But this is creating indeed these budget problems. The latest prediction is that OMPs will make 20% of worldwide prescription drug sales. In euros or in dollars, 20%. And we've only taken care of 5% of the diseases by 2030, so it's soon. Huh? Now, question, are we stuck? As economists, we like to talk about, profit maximizing firms following an opportunity cost logic, i.e., you follow the money. I mean, and that creates the innovation, and that's the advantage of a capitalist system. But then, of course, somebody has to pay for it. And but the point is that indeed, you only invest in OMPs rather than other drugs for bigger markets if you can earn the same market rate of return. And since revenue equals price times the number of customers, price being paid either by the person, the patient, or more often the state, well, the price has to be very high if the disease is rare and very, very high if the disease is ultra rare. Well, interestingly, this idea is only true on average. Recent data show that there are many, many outliers. Indeed, on average, the drug price per patient is inversely proportional to the number of patients, but there are many outliers, i.e., drugs that are much cheaper than the number of patients would indicate, which indicates that also some drugs are also much more expensive, and there are excessive returns that are earned.
If I may, Mathias, what's very interesting because you mentioned the impact on the budget. So very often people say, okay, when you have this new drug for this very specific rare disease, it will be applied only to few patients, so the impact on the budget will not be so high. The point that you are making very well is that there will be more and more such rare disease. So in terms of total budget, at the end, it will be quite huge, even if for a specific disease, a specific product, it could be affordable. But when you multiply by the number of those rare disease and these orphan drugs, it becomes
That's right.
And
and by the way, of course, thanks to technology, we have a much better idea of what a disease is. There is cancer, but then there is lung cancer, and there are different forms of that and different subforms. So almost everything could become a rare disease. Huh? So we have to be careful. Yeah. And so it's a challenge of innovation in a world where you couldn't cut the cost fast enough. Because indeed, typically, you say an innovation is very expensive, but then when you start producing it for millions or hundreds of millions of people, the price goes down. Huh? Electric cars is a good example. Here, the problem is that the disease remains rare. And the question is, now, on the other hand, the good news is that probably we could go after some of these excessive rents. And in particular, one thing that is done more and more is repurposing the drug. And since you don't start from nothing, it's less costly to develop, in particular in terms of reduced clinical trial costs and so on. Also, in some advanced therapy medicinal products, we have seen evidence, such as CAR-T therapy. There are incentives for collaborative networks and sharing of expertise, and for example, the Orphan reference networks, R&D in academic and non-profit organization, and more efficient production and hospital care setting that can cut the cost a lot. So the point is, on average, we look like we are a bit stuck. Smaller number of patients means higher prices, but there are these outliers where promoting innovation could be less expensive. So the double challenge we are facing Well, we have this indeed. On the one hand, we want to reduce prices of OMPs where these excessive rents exist, i.e., where innovation would take place, even if the rate of return is less high. I always like to say, look, I'm all for a decent rate of return. I'm an economist after all. I'm against an indecent rate of return. So, but you know, if you're going after the money, if you allow it, you'll do it. Huh? So, but the idea is indeed reduce the price of OMPs where excessive rents exist, and then reinvest these savings to foster innovation towards part of the 95% of rare diseases with no treatment yet. And so the existing EU orphan drug reform, which modulates the length of market exclusivity to better push through innovation at a sustainable price, goes in the right direction. And I will discuss this a bit afterwards. But it won't suffice given the magnitude of the problem. And therefore, you need a more ambitious approach. And so that's the point of the paper. So talking about incentivizing true innovation, one idea which is linked to the opportunity cost logic is you want the existing regulatory framework to indeed push creative innovation as opposed to marginal innovation, the so-called Me Too drugs. And in fact, in the US, for example, there is a famous paper by Fojo et al. And in the al, you have Andrew Lowe, MIT, showing that in fact, because the FDA, they have this fast track thing. If a drug is very socially promising, you know, true innovation, you can get fast track. And what they show is that fast track drugs earn a lot less money than Me Too's. Because basically Me Too's is so much easier to do, even if it gets slower. So indeed, you need to try and reorient the innovation process. And that means that next to more subsidies for research on some rare diseases, which is needed among the 95%, there is also room for stricter regulation on what the innovation requirements are for other new therapies. And that would kill two birds with one stone, because discouraging marginal innovation immediately raises the incentive then to reorient the effort towards truly innovative research in this opportunity cost logic. So that brings us to our recommendation. Let's call it a four-way plan to stimulate innovation while keeping budgets under control. And the first will be EU joint procurement of OMPs, like what was done for COVID vaccine, joint procurement. So that will cut excessive rents. And then the next three are about fostering innovation in a sustainable way, so without making it too expensive. So the second one will be public-private investment partnerships in special purpose vehicles for new orphan drugs. Then regulatory sandboxing, which is basically relaxing some of the requirements temporarily to allow for experimentation. And finally, very much as advocated by the Draghi report, having better targeted and better centralized innovation incentive policy in that segment. And in a sense that echoes the Tinbergen logic, while Philippe Aghion was the most recent Nobel Prize in economics, Tinbergen was the oldest one, economist from the Netherlands. And he had this Tinbergen principle that if you have multiple goals, you also need multiple instruments. And one problem of the current EU reform, which is not bad, but it's only working on one dimension, and we want to work on multiple dimensions because we have this budget control problem and innovation problem. So I don't know how well I'm doing on time. I'm okay. It's 1 o'clock. Of course, all interventions by co-authors and non-co-authors are welcome. Huh? Will I continue otherwise? Okay, so very quickly on joint procurement. The idea is to say, look, what was done for COVID-19 vaccines could be helpful for rare diseases too, and even more, because let's face it, for COVID vaccines, the economic damage of delaying vaccination was very costly, and therefore some of the criticism maybe of the Commission was not completely wrong. For rare diseases, it's not like a pandemic, so you can take a bit more time by coordinating bargaining, and in any case, once the coordination mechanism is done, you could do it. So getting a better price is really an objective which is very, very important. By the way, it's not as if it's a completely unheard of idea. There are already alliances between member states. Benelux A includes, as the name indicates, Belgium, Netherlands, Luxembourg, and also Austria, and I think Ireland, which is not still there. The Valletta Group, which is Southern Europe, the Visegrad Group are the Visegrad countries in Eastern Europe, and the Nordic Pharmaceutical Forum. By the way, two countries that are part of nothing are France and Germany, two biggest countries, so they would need to be brought on board. But I think it can be win-win. I think this idea of joint procurement is very, very good idea for rare diseases because the problem of high prices come from limited market size. If the EU is coming and saying, look, I'm giving you a bigger market, the 27 member states, so prospect for higher sales and therefore lower prices. Also, you could combine that with advanced market commitments, like is done with vaccine, as shown with Levin and others. Ideally coupled with a percentage of the profits to be refunded by the company in case these returns turn out to be higher than expected. So as I say, companies deserve a market rate of return because otherwise they won't do it. But what is in excess, even if they don't get it, they would still do the innovation.
So if I may intervene here, the fact that we would centralize purchases is not only a way to reduce prices. One of the reasons why the prices could run so high, that for health authorities, if it's a very small population, you can afford a high price out of the total budget. So this makes individual authorities softer in their negotiation, which could be changed anyway. But the fact that you centralize the purchase precisely gives this incentive that if you win access, you get automatic access through all of the EU. So it's also increasing the return, not just lowering the prices.
Which I would add to that if you make the drug available, the orphan drug available for high unmet medical need in all EU member states, you automatically get an additional year market exclusivity in the new proposal, which means it makes sense.
So that this is it's not just about cutting the prices. It comes with benefits.
But even with this idea to cut the prices, you must be sure that the poor country will be able to accommodate these lower prices in their budget. And I think that there in the paper you have a good idea, which is to use the structural funds perhaps to assist.
That's right. I didn't mention this here, but one thing with the current situation where every country bargains with the companies, the price they accept is different. You clearly see that the higher the price, e.g. Germany, the more they get access. But then at times you have this crazy thing, which are what do you call again?
Resales.
Parallel imports. So the price is lower in France, but then some petit malin, some people go and buy in France and sell in Germany. And so, which is of course very, which is not great. Here now, then people say, but on the other hand, it's not efficient. It can be shown. It's not efficient to sell at the same high price, at the same price to a very rich country like Germany and a very poor country like Bulgaria. So that makes sense not to have the same prices. On the other hand, the Bulgarians, they get it, very, very, very late. So it would be better to say, look, same price for everybody, but then we subsidize, we give a lump sum transfer out of the structural funds for poorer countries to compensate the poorer countries for paying the average price.
This will be really something seen very positively by the farmers and the big pharma. I always remember, when I was at the European IMI, I had the CEO of Roche asking me to come in Basel, and he told me that his main concern is really paralleling.
Okay. Right now, we don't devote too much space to this, but we could, or we could have another paper. So, okay. Anyway, so that's for the EU joint procurement for OMPs. Second idea, public, and a lot of these ideas are in fact discussed in earlier work of subsets of or 8 author team. Second idea, public-private investment in special purpose vehicles for new orphan drugs. Now, these at some level, it's a bit, corporate finance / contract theory. What are SPVs? These are basically partnerships between different stakeholders focused on a particular project. These are special legal entities that are created, designed to share risks and benefits across the stakeholders in a particular way. The objective would be, so here we're talking about increasing innovation by channeling resources into research on groups of rare diseases, redistributing risks across project and stakeholders depending on the various objectives, and generating revenue for reinvestment in research, development, and innovation. So the idea is that fostering innovation is important. Among the partners, industry, venture capitalists, or for-profit entities, government entities, supposed to follow the common good, depending on the politician, academic and research institutes, interested also in academic glory, and patient organizations who want patients not to be forgotten.
Do we have example of pharma companies which engage in this SPV approach?
Not directly, but we do have those stations with other industry participants, and the station is the usage of CAR-T technology to inoculate the CAR with the right receptor. We're supporting a trial network of academias to conduct transversal trial. And their benefit is, of course, not necessarily the end product. Their benefit is to make sure that their technology is adopted in the most high-end labs of the world, which then allow them to cascade and to train the researchers.
Which companies?
Molteni, specifically in this case, an Italian technology for CAR-T. And so those type of partnerships.
The name is Molteni. Did he make something?
No.
He had Molteni, but anyway, elsewhere.
And a question, the big research institutes on some diseases, aren't they co-funded also by companies?
Oh.
So that's a form of SPV, because they invest in a big research institute that they don't control directly.
Well, they try to control, I mean,
Yes,
that's.
absolutely, but the point is, it's not owned by them. So
Yeah.
this is de facto a form of SPV.
Yeah.
Without the commitments that we want to build into
Yeah.
this kind of SPV.
Okay, so again, it's always think of it as fostering innovation and limiting budgets by going after excessive rents. At times, currently, the public sector invests in upstream high-risk research, universities and so on, but receives too little compensation if commercialization is really successful. And at the same time, so that's when the story ends up well, because we come with a treatment and it's indeed profitable. And then you have this other problem that you have a lack of R&D in specific areas of high unmet medical need. And then you have often large pharma companies coming late to pick the winners, and it's not always in a way that protects the earlier investors from the public sector. So the idea would be to have a mission-oriented strategy, focusing in particular on platform innovations, so where it can serve a number of new treatments, and what economists call externalities, positive externalities, but that may be hard to capture by private investor, therefore they don't want to do it. And so it's called, it's the targeted push incentive, push meaning you give some money up front. And so, I mean, there are details that can be discussed. I don't know whether now or later, but what you need to do is to target this in order to do a cost-benefit analysis for society as a whole, stimulate in the big things, moonshots, and at the same time, make sure that the private sector gets into the game. So being in fact protected against excessive downside risks. But at the same time, then, if they are protected against downside risk, they should also share the upside benefits. And this is where at times and often it's not done enough. So the public or non-profit entities should retain sufficient share of upside profit that would then be reinvested to keep fostering innovation, creating thereby a virtuous circle.
So if I may intervene there as well, these SPVs would not be something that would be easily feasible in markets that are very big. Here we are talking about is 95% of diseases where nothing happens because everybody is waiting for somebody else to move. So the companies leave money on the table, they don't do it. One of the papers by Andy Lowe showed that you have a business cycle which has nothing to do with pharma. Say you have this energy shock because of the Ukraine invasion. Suddenly the money dries up. The private sector doesn't want to invest, and so you shut down projects that could be very good. This is the kind of risks where there is a market failure, things are not happening, and so you could really attract the industry, because we are talking about projects which should happen. They would like it to happen, but it does not happen. It's clear that if you have already a blockbuster, making them want to join would not happen. I mean, it would be useless. And rare diseases is a good place where to do these things.
Do you think that company would it will be facilitated by the creation of subsidiaries to have the companies entering into SPV approaches?
That's typically what they would do, I expect. But what we see with rare disease is instead that they bought different biotechs and they incorporated them inside the main company. So Pfizer, Roche, etc., have a rare disease unit which is inside the company. They don't split that as subsidiaries.
But that's after the innovation has been successful, and the question becomes, do they pay enough for that? Huh? So that's more, while here, we are talking about also making sure it gets started. And
you would need to have been part of the early investors to get the patent.
Do you think that the way the big pharmas are organized will allow them to enter into specific SPV without creating these subsidiaries with this specific approach? That's an important question.
What is your question exactly, Michel? Because the way that you can see this is we have an SPV which is a separate legal entity, and the pharma company just acquires a minority stake in the separate legal entity, and the other shareholders are the state,
that's
the editing, and the patient groups which own it, or universities. And so it would not be very different from what they do today, where a pharma company acquires a 20% stake in a promising technology to make sure that at some point you got first view on the asset and acquire it. So it should be common practice, and it should be part of their standard operating procedures to do that. So I don't see a lot of practical hurdles or reasons why pharma would not be interested in setting up such a state.
Yeah, but the governance will be different from the overall governance of the big pharma.
And often, typically, what you see is that, I think you see is that you would have a more like technology scouting department, which does it very often for things which could become blockbusters. And what we are now doing is applying the same methodology for rare diseases, where it's the same principles, only in a slightly. So you should be able to socialize the concepts with the leadership of pharma companies.
Thank you.
okay, so that was about SPVs. Now, regulatory sandboxing to keep up with the pace of innovation. And to me, sandboxing is a bit of a new word. But you can think of it as, facilitating learning by experimentation, by relaxing temporarily regulatory requirements. I guess Hans-Georg Eichler has talked a lot about that. The idea that for some areas of high unmet need, you want to go fast track. That's not new, and there's a bunch of programs in the US and in Europe doing that. And there are also orphan-specific regulation, as I've already said earlier. The view is that it's too much one size fits all. Our view is that time-limited regulatory framework for controlled experimentation with new regulatory approaches should be facilitated. And it is important because, for example, 32% of original drugs with orphan drug designation have been repurposed. So you try and indeed keep learning about this. But you have, since it's repurposing, you are not starting from scratch. There is a need for additional research, but maybe we can be a bit more relaxed about the requirements, safety requirements, and so on for a while. And provided you can learn about it. And indeed, and we were discussing that with Michael recently, there is this paper again by Andrew Lowe and co-authors about which I think was I discussed in the first ever reading seminar of I3h in 2017, where their point is they're looking at the FDA and saying, interestingly, of course, for drugs, you always want to know about efficiency and safety, which is normal. The question is, what do you put the probabilities of the two? And what Lowe and co-authors say, look, very strange that you don't take into account what happens to the patient if a drug is not found, approved and found. So frankly, and it started out, frankly, among the gay community that was facing the AIDS epidemic. And they were saying, look, we are dying here. Please allow us to experiment on these treatments in a sense. And why? Because otherwise we would be dead. Huh? And so indeed, if you have pancreatic cancer, it's not good. If you have diabetes, you can wait a bit more. So basically, you need to be tougher, more conservative. The value of life is without the treatment. And so it's the same idea here. What you want is to target how flexible you may be, depending indeed on the environment. And in particular, for rare diseases, it makes sense to think, if you have kids in particular that are really in bad trouble and will die, well, let's, and there are some cases, of course, there are a lot more cases here and there that are discussed in the paper than I'm presenting here, but there is a famous case here of a treatment that was invented in Europe, in France, I think, in Cano.
Yeah.
And where, since it was a very rare disease, the small patient numbers prevented a confirmatory phase 3 trial in the EU, while there was fast track in the US. So in the end, it was invented in Europe, authorized in the US, but not in the EU, because the view was we haven't tested on enough people, even though all treated patients significantly benefited with no adverse consequences. So these are cases of excessive conservatism, and where a case-by-case temporary market authorization would make sense. And we think it's quite valuable in particular in the case of rare disease.
I understand that sometimes the companies are not in favor of this, because if you have, unexpected side effects, it might jeopardize the new indication, but it can also jeopardize, the initial indication, which in this case was cancer.
Okay, that's a very good point.
But finally, they succeed with the help of the FDA to convince the company, but Guillaume Cano can tell you that it was very hard work.
But they succeed in the US, but not in the EU, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so basically, the idea here is to have, rather than blanket sandboxing for rare diseases, we have to go more case by case on a cost-benefit assessment, risk-benefit assessment, and making sure we actively learn how to develop a new regulatory framework for these new technologies that optimize the learning procedure. Finally,
okay, if I may again, for this, probably there is a distinction to be made between repurposed drugs and new technologies, I think.
That's why
because you already start
Yeah.
from some
You have two different slides exactly emphasizing the two.
Yeah.
One is drugs where you already know a lot.
Yeah.
And the case of CAR T cells seem to be one of these cases where you knew a lot, the indication is different, and so the experimentation should be accelerated.
Mhm.
And the other one is you have new technologies. Maybe that's where you're going now. So the last line here, to actively learn how to develop new regulatory frameworks. We have new technologies, and the regulation is based on chemical entities or chemical products, and the way we designed the experimentation, the phases, etc., is based on these technologies. Now we have platform innovations, which the rest is copy paste and do apply to A, apply to B. So the application itself is a different risk, and I understand you want a standard procedure for the applications, but the regulation today is still based on innovations from the past.
Yeah.
So we need to innovate with regulation as well, and we don't know yet what works and what does not. And again, we are facing ultra-rare diseases where the regulation itself is a hurdle, the case of CAR T cells illustrates it very well. Some has this very nice article where you show how the lack of flexibility on the side of regulators puts a brake to innovation, in particular for children. And so we need new regulations. Here we have cases which are desperate, so high cost of no action, and maybe the regulation is bad. So why not try out different regulations as well? So sandboxing is not just experimenting on the side of companies, it's also experimenting on the side of regulators.
That's true.
Okay. And then finally, following the Draghi report towards smarter incentives targeted innovation policy. Now, the Draghi report diagnostic on EU competitiveness gap is similar in a sense for pharma than for as for some other sectors. We need more of a single market. We need more coordinated public R&D. Max Planck is good, INSERM is good, but they are national, not European. Also, in the private sector, we have much less private R&D, listed and even more private equity, a weaker supporting environment. There are bigger hubs in US and China. And indeed, not enough of a single market, slow and complex EU regulatory framework, and in particular, and this is a Draghi report recommendation that we subscribe to, while we, the EMA, we now have an EU FDA, but health technology assessment are still national. Now, pricing and reimbursement are national too, and the health data space is fragmented. So all these things are problematic, but in particular, health technology assessment, that seems like a low-hanging fruit. It's probably easier. Of course, you need to convince the national civil servant that they need to work, but that's okay. Huh? As I say, so we agree with that. Basically what we need, just like there is BARDA, we need a HERA with the same budget and possibly the same, expertise in innovation policy in order to improve innovation in Europe, and in a sense, without increasing the budget. You just need to centralize the budget. I like to say that the EU is a regulatory giant. More than 50% of regulations come from the EU, but is a budgetary dwarf. The EU budget is only 1% of EU GDP, while in countries like France, the national budget is 50% of GDP. And the US is somewhere in between, but definitely not at 1 or even 10%, much bigger. So indeed, COVID vaccines explains the way. And on rare diseases, all these recommendations asking for more Europe makes particular sense, because the problem is already that even the EU market would be small. So national markets is even worse, of course. Huh? So ultra small. That's right. Getting rid of the ultra small market to help research on the ultra rare diseases. So indeed, more centralization, more coordination, and that will also help, by the way, on the organization of clinical trials, which is a key challenge for rare diseases also. Okay, thank you. There are other comments? Yeah.
So you mentioned about the coordination between the European countries. So it has benefits of to increase the bargaining power, but it can also lower the transaction cost of the company to be in the market.
That's right. That's right. Indeed, companies, and that's what one of the things that Draghi says, because okay, Draghi has been accused at times of being too close to industry lobbies. He says, look, it is win-win if we manage to simplify regulation by going from 27 national regulators to one EU regulator. It doesn't mean we need to soften the regulation or to strengthen the regulation. It's orthogonal. It is win-win to indeed centralize in a way then that would reduce bureaucratic costs.
Yes. So this is more on the horizontal part of the planning, but there's another part that is more on the vertical side. That is the EMA, the FTA, and the local reimbursement process. Will be a better? Should be there any better coordination between the EMA, the FTA, and the local reimbursement process, specific to the rare disease policy here? And second, because you also mentioned about the true innovation, and maybe there also should be a coordination regarding how to define the true innovation.
I mean, in a sense, the EMA does that, huh? Because like Andrew Lowe was criticizing the FDA, because indeed you can then decide how conservative or how liberal you are in allowing for these things, you know, type 1, type 2 errors. That in a sense is first defined by EMA, where we are done. Even though I guess health technology assessment then give insights to national governments to decide how much to reimburse, and there having the work multiplied doesn't really make sense. So in that sense, I think the EU HTA is indeed a step that will also go into the simplification.
Is there really no collaboration between the different HTA agencies, you know?
There are indeed, and I don't know all the details, and some may, but Hilda,
Indeed, but this is an overarching organization, but with the new HTA regulation, there's indeed this joint clinical assessment and joint scientific consultation, whereby indeed the evidence generation, or at least the evidence that needs to be generated, is jointly discussed between EMA and HTA on making sure you have the necessary data, or from the start of the clinical trial, the necessary data to later on make informed based decisions, both at the clinical side as well as on the pricing and reimbursement advice.
I guess it's a bit the difference between federalism and non-federalism. The EU is not yet a federal state, so you have qualified majority or even unanimity that can make the work much less complete. So all these things you have. I think it is good to build EU institutions to make sure we have the centralization. If you want that, huh? Now, some people dislike the EU. I think around this table there are mostly supporters.
Could you go back one slide?
I stopped the presentation and there were people.
Anyway, it was about clinical trials, because I think your last sentences was about, you know, streamlining clinical trials, right?
Let's see.
The coordination of clinical trials for orphan disease with the
in general.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it was the very.
Yeah, really the last one.
Yeah. With the organization of clinical trial, a key challenge, you have to know that, you know, actually I have the figure. I think that most of clinical trials, in a way or another, are stopped before completion because they don't succeed to recruit enough patients. So there is a lot of energy deposition. And I think that indeed it's more than coordination. And what we really need is a real European network or European organization. We don't have an NIH-like organization in the EU, and I think this has dramatic effect on the organization of clinical trials, which are too small, and as I said, which sometimes do not deliver or don't go to the end. And for rare disease, it's especially important because their recruitment is a key issue. Yeah.
No, indeed. Georges?
Yes, if I may, just one thing I put on the chat, AstraZeneca is in Cambridge, but that's not why I want to intervene. Just to build on what Michel has said, and it's, in a sense, it's not sandboxing, but it's the same idea. I was surprised to learn that Spain has actually overtaken Germany for the number of clinical trials. So in percentage-wise at the world level, Spain is also losing ground because the Chinese are doing so many. But in terms of absolute numbers, Spain has maintained its position in terms of the number of clinical trials, successful ones, that are being carried out in Europe. And what Michel is saying, probably we should learn from where things are working well. And on the point on HTA, I think the way it works now is that with the new HTA regulation, you have a subgroup of countries that do common HTA, but there is always one country in the lead. And right now, I think Germany is in the lead in 60% of these new HTAs based on the new regulation. So.
You mean that there are benefits before we centralize to look at who's doing well and not well to make sure?
No, I think
we focus on the good examples.
Well, yes, I mean, diversity, you can learn from diversity. In terms of clinical trials, and I think the problem is obviously even more acute in case of rare diseases, maybe, we could learn from the Spanish model, which is, I think, mainly based in public hospitals, and transpose it to transborder clinical trials, where you could reach possibly a critical mass. So that's for the clinical trials, sorry. For the HTA, I think, it's a question of political economy. You have the regulation, but you couldn't go to centralize HTA from one day to the next. So I guess part of the reason why you have this transition from national to more supranational with subgroup of countries taking the lead is also an example of experimentation.
Yeah. No, just like for joint procurement, Benelux Day, Visegrad Group, and so on. But exactly. It's also the need to be more centralized. But we have to be careful not to centralize on a suboptimal procedure.
Model.
Indeed. Okay. Other comments? Well,
in particular online?
No.
Okay, but then thank you all.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you.